A 76-year-old veteran spent his savings from collecting scrap to buy a ruined farmhouse for his final years. When he opened the frozen door, he found only darkness, bitter cold, and a weak growl. Inside, a starving German Shepherd mother shielded a trembling puppy with her last strength. He rescued them, restored the heat, and slowly turned the abandoned house into a home. But days later, the puppy drank from a strange stream and collapsed from poisoning. To save him, Eamon and the mother dog had to uncover a dangerous truth hidden beneath the snow. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, then like the video and subscribe. The first morning of January came down bright and hard over Sunfield Basin. There had been snow during the night, but no storm. The sky above eastern Oregon was a pale, unbroken blue, and the fields shone so fiercely beneath it that Eamon Brice had to narrow his eyes against the glare. Fence posts rose from the white ground like dark stitches. Farther out, bare cottonwoods held their branches toward the cold, every twig silvered with frost. Morningglass Farm appeared beyond them without ceremony. The timber house sat low against the hillside, its roof sagging slightly beneath the snow. One porch step had split down the middle. A shutter hung crooked beside the eastern window. Behind the house stood a leaning barn and the glassless frame of an old greenhouse, both outlined so cleanly by the winter light that they looked less ruined than unfinished. Eamon slowed the pickup at the end of the access road. For several seconds he remained behind the wheel. At 76, he had learned that important moments rarely announced themselves properly. Men imagined drums, speeches, hands raised in farewell. Most real decisions ended with the click of an engine cooling and an old man sitting alone inside a truck, wondering whether he had mistaken stubbornness for courage. He pulled a folded scrap of paper from the inside pocket of his faded olive field jacket. The paper had been creased so many times it no longer lay flat. On one side was the faded remainder of an electric bill from 31 years earlier. On the other, Coralie had drawn a small house facing a field of snow. Her lines had been quick and imperfect. The chimney leaned. One window was larger than the other. She had written beneath it, "Someday, somewhere quiet." Eamon looked from the drawing to Morningglass Farm. "Well," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "you were never particular about the roof." The joke entered the empty cab and found no one waiting for it. That had been the nature of most of his humor for 3 decades. He folded the paper carefully and returned it to his pocket. The truck bed carried a portable generator, 2 oil-filled electric heaters, fuel cans, hand tools, an insulated sleeping bag, canned food, water, and enough reclaimed hardware to make a sensible man reconsider the meaning of ownership. Eamon had known the house furnace was broken. He had known the well had not been certified. He had known the county did not clear the road quickly after heavy snow. He had also prepared to sleep in the insulated rear compartment of the pickup if the house proved unsafe. Hope, in Eamon's experience, was most useful when accompanied by a backup plan. He climbed down from the cab, favoring his left leg until the stiffness eased from his right knee. At 5'9", he was not the towering figure people often imagined when they heard the words Navy SEAL. Age had narrowed him without making him fragile. His shoulders remained broad beneath the old jacket, though the right sat slightly lower than the left. Deep lines crossed his forehead and ran beside his gray-blue eyes. His white hair was cut short but never quite obedient, and a trimmed silver mustache softened a face otherwise sharpened by weather, silence, and old restraint. A red carpenter's pencil rested behind his right ear. The wind moved across the pasture and lifted fine snow around his boots. Eamon stood before the porch, listening. Nothing. No machinery. No voices, no sound from the barn. That silence had helped sell him the place. He carried the first heater onto the porch, then the tool bag. The front door refused to open. Ice had formed along the bottom of the frame, sealing it to the threshold. Eamon set down the heater and removed a flat pry bar from his bag. He worked around the edge patiently, testing the wood rather than forcing it. The door was old enough to punish impatience. When the ice finally cracked, he leaned his shoulder against the panel. The door moved 3 inches. Something growled inside. Eamon stopped. It was not the deep, confident warning of a healthy dog. The sound was low and frayed, almost lost beneath the scrape of wood, yet it carried intention. He shifted his weight away from the opening. The house remained silent again. Eamon removed his glove and held one hand near the gap. Cold air flowed out against his skin, carrying the smells of damp timber, stale fabric, animal fur, and something faintly sour. "Easy," he said. The growl returned. Eamon had heard fear disguised as aggression in more than one language. The shape of it had never changed much. He widened the door slowly and stepped into the entryway without crossing farther than necessary. The living room lay beneath a blue winter dimness. Frost covered the interior edges of the windows. A stone hearth occupied the far wall, black and dead. Beside it, several ruined blankets had been dragged into a rough nest. A German shepherd lay in the middle of them. She was sable, dark across the spine and shoulders, the black fading into deep gold along her chest and legs. Her ribs showed beneath the coat. Her right ear stood upright. The left bore a crescent-shaped tear along its outer edge. One amber eye remained fixed on Eamon, while the other narrowed with exhaustion. Curled beneath her chest was a puppy. The little male was black and tan, though hunger had dulled the coat. His front paws looked too large for his thin body. A pale patch marked the center of his chest. He barely lifted his head. An opened bag of dog food lay flattened near the wall. A water bucket stood beside it, frozen solid. Eamon's jaw tightened. He did not move closer. The mother raised her lip, exposing her teeth. Her body trembled as she tried to shift herself more completely over the puppy. "I see him," Eamon said quietly. "I'm not taking him." The words were for himself as much as for her. There were moments when speaking calmly gave the hands something to follow. He backed out of the room. From the truck he brought a can of soft dog food, a metal bowl, bottled water, and one of the electric heaters. He warmed the water only slightly, using a small camping stove on the porch. Too much heat, too quickly, could harm a body already losing its battle with cold. When he returned, the mother had not changed position. Eamon placed the bowl several feet away from her. He set the food beside it, then removed his field jacket and spread it on the floor between them. Without the jacket, his charcoal wool sweater showed the narrowness age had carved into his frame. He lowered himself slowly, his right knee protesting, and sat with one shoulder turned toward the dogs. He avoided looking directly at the mother. "Not much of a housewarming," he murmured. The puppy moved first. His nose lifted from the blankets. He caught the scent of food, then of wool, leather, and the strange man sitting in the cold. One front paw emerged. The mother's growl deepened. The puppy stopped, but only for a moment. Hunger made its own decisions. He crawled from beneath her chest, belly dragging over the blankets. Eamon remained still. The puppy reached the edge of the nest, attempted to stand, and folded sideways onto the floor. The mother lunged half a step after him. Her legs failed. The sound she made then was not a growl. It was shorter, broken by a breath that would not hold. Eamon's hand tightened against his thigh. He knew that sound too. There were cries produced by pain, and others produced by the discovery that the body could no longer protect what the heart had promised to protect. The puppy dragged himself another foot and collapsed beside Eamon's boot. For one suspended moment, Eamon did nothing. 30 years earlier, he had sat beneath fluorescent hospital light while a surgeon explained that Coralie's heart had stopped despite every measure taken. The doctor had spoken carefully. Eamon had listened carefully. Neither discipline nor attention had changed the result. Since then, he had avoided promises he could not enforce. Now the mother watched him from the blankets, waiting to learn whether helplessness would cost her the last thing she had. Eamon slowly pulled his sweater over his head. The cold struck through his undershirt immediately. He wrapped the puppy in the wool, keeping the small face uncovered. The body inside his hands felt frighteningly light. "All right," he whispered. "No promises, but we work." The puppy's ear twitched. That tiny movement changed the room. Eamon carried him only as far as the jacket on the floor, keeping him within the mother's sight. Then he turned toward the dead hearth. A broken cabinet leaned near the kitchen doorway. Eamon removed one door from its hinges, split the dry inner panel with a hatchet, and built a small fire using paper from an abandoned drawer. He did not make it large. The chimney needed testing, and the room had to warm gradually. Next, he dragged the generator from the truck and positioned it outside, well away from the house. He ran a heavy extension cable through the entryway and connected one heater. Warmth entered the room not as a wave, but as a faint change in the air. The mother's eyes followed every movement. Inside her old leather collar, Eamon found a name worn into the leather: Ardell. He read it once and said nothing. The puppy had no tag. Eamon called Dr. Lenora Fitch from the porch where the signal was strongest. He had met her only briefly during the property inspection when the real estate agent mentioned the nearest veterinarian. Lenora answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was brisk and awake, as if sleep had learned not to argue with her. Eamon described the dogs, the temperature, the frozen water, and the mother's condition. "Do not feed either of them a full meal," she said. "Small amounts only. Keep the warming slow. I'm coming. There's no need to risk the road alone. I didn't ask whether there was a need." The line went dead. 40 minutes later, an older utility vehicle climbed the access road, followed by a county patrol truck. Lenora Fitch entered first, carrying a dark canvas medical bag. She was 58, compact and straight-backed, with red hair streaked silver and tied low at her neck. Her square-framed glasses had fogged in the cold, but her hazel-brown eyes had already taken in the heater, the fire, the water bowl, and the measured distance Eamon had kept from Ardell. "You did not overheat the room," she said. It sounded less like praise than confirmation that he had not created a second emergency. Deputy Hollis Crane followed her inside. At 51, he had the deliberate movements of a man who disliked disturbing a scene before he understood it. His brown-gray hair was cut close, and his winter patrol coat was dusted with snow. Hollis photographed the frozen bucket, the food bag, the ruined blankets, and the condition of both dogs. He checked the sale documents Eamon had left on the kitchen counter. The seller signed that no animals remained on the property, he said. "Then the seller lied," Eamon answered. Hollis looked toward Ardell. "Yes." Lenora approached the dogs with caution. Ardell's warning became sharper. The veterinarian stopped before the dog felt forced to act. "She's too weak to defend herself safely," Lenora said. "That makes her more dangerous, not less." Eamon understood. A soft muzzle and mild sedative were necessary before Lenora could perform a complete examination. Eamon held the blanket around the puppy while Lenora worked. Ardell watched him through heavy-lidded eyes, suspicion unbroken. Eamon did not ask her to forgive him for allowing the restraint. Some kindnesses did not feel kind while they were happening. Lenora confirmed severe dehydration and malnutrition in Ardell. The puppy was underweight and had a respiratory infection, but his lungs remained responsive enough to offer hope. "Both can recover," she said. "That is not the same as saying they will." Eamon nodded. He preferred truth without decoration. Hollis arranged temporary foster authorization while the county attempted to locate the previous owner. He warned Eamon that the dogs were not legally his yet. "They're not property I found in a drawer," Eamon said. "No," Hollis replied, "which is why we do this correctly." By evening, the vehicles were gone. The house held a weak but steady warmth. Morrow, still unnamed, slept wrapped in Eamon's sweater near Ardell's chest. Small portions of food remained down. Medication and written instructions sat on the table. Eamon unrolled his sleeping bag beside the heater. Ardell did not come near him. She lay between the puppy and the front door, her amber eyes opening whenever the logs shifted in the hearth. Eamon listened to the house settle. Wind pressed softly against the windows. Pipes clicked somewhere in the walls. The heater hummed. The puppy coughed once, then went quiet. Long after midnight, Eamon fell asleep. Near dawn, a faint scraping sound woke him. His hand moved instinctively toward the floor beside the sleeping bag, where no weapon lay and none was needed. Ardell had left the nest. She now rested several feet from the doorway of the small room where Eamon slept. Morrow remained behind her near the fire. Ardell had positioned herself where she could see both the puppy and the old man. She did not approach him. She did not lower her guard. But sometime in the night, the border of what she had chosen to protect had widened. Eamon lay still beneath the blanket. For 30 years, silence had meant there was no one in the world listening for him. Now, in a house without proper heat, a wounded dog kept watch over his breathing. He closed his eyes again. This time the darkness did not feel empty. By the fourth morning, Morningglass Farm had begun making noises of its own. The heater clicked awake before sunrise. Water knocked unevenly through the repaired pipe beneath the kitchen wall. Wind moved through the broken greenhouse panes with a thin, flute-like whistle that changed pitch whenever the temperature dropped. There were also smaller sounds now. A bowl scraping across the floor. Claws skittering where the boards sloped toward the pantry. The muffled thump of a German Shepherd puppy discovering, for the third time, that a chair leg would not move simply because he had decided to pull it. Eamon Brice opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. The house had been silent when he bought it. He had considered that an advantage. Now something was chewing his bootlace. He leaned over the edge of the narrow cot he had assembled near the living room heater. Morrow sat beneath him with one end of the replacement cord between his teeth and an expression of complete moral innocence. "You have food," Eamon said. Morrow tugged harder. "That is not food." The puppy braced his oversized front paws against the floor and shook his head with more determination than strength. Across the room, Ardell watched from the blankets beside the hearth. Her amber eyes moved from Morrow to Eamon, measuring whether the old man's voice carried danger. Eamon released the lace. Morrow stumbled backward, triumphant, and rolled into the empty water bowl. The crash made Ardell rise halfway before weakness forced her back down. Eamon did not laugh immediately. The sound surprised him when it came, a rough, unused breath that became something warmer before he could stop it. Morrow emerged from the bowl, shook himself, and looked offended by the existence of metal. "You planned that poorly," Eamon told him. The puppy sneezed. It had been several days since the county granted Eamon temporary foster authority. Deputy Hollis Crane was still trying to reach the former owner, while Dr. Lenora Fitch had left enough instructions on the kitchen table to govern a field hospital. Small meals, measured water, medication twice daily, no sudden increase in exercise, no rich scraps, no attempt to bathe Ardell until her body temperature and strength were stable. Eamon had added times, quantities, and check marks in Carpenter's pencil. Discipline was easier when written down. The house required a different kind of list. The primary furnace remained unreliable. 2 windows leaked air. A section of ceiling near the pantry showed water damage, though the roof above it appeared sound beneath the snow. The rear door would not latch unless lifted by the handle. Eamon approached each problem as he had approached salvage for most of his civilian life, not by asking whether something was ugly, but whether it could still carry weight. A warped cabinet door became a wind barrier. A length of copper pipe recovered from the barn replaced a cracked section beneath the kitchen sink. He mounted a pulley above the cellar steps so he would not have to carry fuel cans down by hand. An old garden cart received 2 stronger wheels and became a tool trolley. When a timber brace proved too heavy to raise safely, he used a hydraulic jack, 3 blocks of wood, and patience. Age had not taken away his understanding of force. It had merely made disrespecting force more expensive. On the 6th day, Lenora arrived while Eamon was fastening sheet metal around a leaking stove joint. He did not hear her enter through the back door. She stood behind him in a dark blue-gray winter coat, her medical bag in one hand and melting snow on her insulated boots. Her red hair, streaked with silver, had been tied low at her neck. Square-framed glasses rested on the bridge of her nose. "You would be easier to examine if you wore a bell," she said. Eamon turned sharply. His right knee struck the edge of the tool cart. He caught it before it tipped, then looked at her without amusement. "You entered through a door that does not latch. I lifted the handle. That does not make it less of a door. It makes it a door with instructions." Lenora removed her gloves and knelt near Ardell. Unlike the first visit, the dog did not bare her teeth immediately. She lowered her head and watched Lenora's hands. "That is progress," Lenora said. "She tolerates you." From her, that is practically a medical endorsement. Ardell had gained a little strength. Her ribs still showed, but she could stand long enough to cross the room and drink. Morrow's breathing sounded clearer, though he remained underweight. Lenora checked his lungs while he attempted to eat the end of her stethoscope. "He has opinions," she observed. "He has theft in his character. He is 8 weeks old. Then it developed early." After the examination, Lenora studied the room. Fresh-cut boards stood beside the wall. Tools covered the table. A repaired section of pipe shone behind the stove. Eamon's sleeping bag had not been properly rolled in 2 days. "You are trying to repair the house, the barn, the heating system, and 2 dogs at the same time. I am preventing things from falling down." Lenora closed her medical bag. "That is how men like you fall down." Eamon did not answer. He disliked the sentence because it was accurate in more than one direction. Near noon, an unfamiliar station wagon climbed the access road and stopped beside the porch. Odessa Flint stepped out carrying a covered pot against her chest. She was short and round-faced, with silver blonde hair curled neatly around her ears and an expression suggesting the weather had inconvenienced her personally. A mustard-colored cardigan showed beneath her winter coat. Around her neck was a striped red and blue scarf. Eamon opened the door before she could knock. "I did not order anything." "No," Odessa said. "People who need soup rarely do." She moved past him with the confidence of someone accustomed to entering kitchens that did not belong to her. The pot contained beef stew. A paper bag held bread, 2 jars of broth, and cooked meat set aside for the dogs under Lenora's instructions. "I own the copper spoon," Odessa explained as she arranged the food on the counter. "Which means I hear things before the people involved have decided whether they want them heard." Eamon looked at Lenora. "I told the clinic assistant," Lenora said. "The clinic assistant told her sister. Her sister eats breakfast at the copper spoon." Odessa lifted one eyebrow. "And now half of Sunfield Basin knows a decorated hermit bought a broken farm and found 2 starving shepherds in the living room. I am not decorated in the story. That is the part you object to." By sunset, 2 more vehicles had reached the farm. A retired feed store clerk left a bundle of wool blankets on the porch. A sheep farmer Eamon had never met delivered split firewood. Someone placed 2 unopened bags of dog food beside the barn and drove away before he could refuse them. The following morning, there was a box of furnace fittings near the door. Eamon stood over the supplies with his hands on his hips. He had spent years paying exact prices, exchanging exact labor, and owing no one more than could be written on paper. Unrequested kindness had no clear accounting system. It bothered him. Odessa returned that afternoon to collect her empty pot and found him stacking the donated wood separately from his own. "You are making a rejection pile," she said. "I am organizing it." "You put all the useful things where you can return them. I did not ask for charity." Odessa set the pot on the porch rail. "No one is offering charity. They are bringing me supplies. They are bringing the dogs supplies. You simply happen to live where the dogs are." Eamon's mouth tightened. Odessa looked through the open doorway where Morrow was attempting to drag one of Eamon's leather gloves across the floor. Ardell lay nearby, following him with tired vigilance. "No one pities a man stubborn enough to move into a house without a working furnace," Odessa continued. "They are making sure those animals do not pay for his pride." Eamon glanced at her. Odessa smiled without softness. "Keep the wood." She drove away before he could answer. That evening, Eamon carried every donated item inside. He told himself it was because the temperature would fall overnight. 2 days later, a black sport utility vehicle came along the access road. The vehicle was too clean for the farm, though road salt streaked its lower panels. A small company emblem appeared on the door, a silver circle crossed by 3 green lines. The man who stepped out was tall, thin, and carefully dressed for rural weather. His charcoal wool coat fell below the knee. A burgundy scarf was tucked neatly at the collar. Steel gray hair had been combed to one side, and black leather gloves covered his hands. He introduced himself as Fulton Vey, Regional Director of Community Relations and Land Acquisition for Lydian Renewal Systems. "I hope I am not arriving at a bad time," Fulton said. Eamon looked at the house, the generator cable crossing the porch, and Morrow chewing a strip of cardboard near the doorway. "That depends on what you consider good." Fulton accepted the answer with a practiced smile. They spoke outside. Lydian planned to build a facility for dismantling and processing used industrial batteries. Fulton described jobs, road improvements, transportation contracts, and additional tax revenue for Sunfield Basin. He spoke without rushing and did not insult Eamon by pretending the project was charitable. The company had already secured purchase options on several surrounding properties. Morningglass Farm sat between 2 large parcels and along the proposed route of a service road and drainage corridor. Fulton offered more than Eamon had paid. Enough to replace the old pickup. Enough to rent a warm apartment for the rest of his life. Enough to walk away from the failing furnace, the leaking windows, the leaning barn, and the work his aging body had only begun. Eamon took Coralie's folded drawing from his inside pocket. He did not show it to Fulton. His thumb rested against the paper through the cloth. "No, he said. Fulton waited. "You have not heard the figure. I heard enough. May I ask why?" Eamon looked beyond him toward the white pasture. Afternoon light had begun turning the snow pale gold. "No." Fulton studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I will leave my card. The offer does not expire immediately." When he returned to his vehicle, the diesel engine started with a low mechanical shudder. Ardell was standing inside the doorway. The reversing alarm sounded. Her entire body changed. She backed away so quickly that her hindquarters struck the wall. Her ears flattened. A tremor passed through her shoulders. The growl in her throat was low, but her attention was fixed on the vehicle rather than the man. Eamon stepped between Ardell and the open doorway without approaching her. Fulton drove away. The alarm faded down the road. Ardell remained pressed near the wall, breathing rapidly. Eamon closed the door and lowered himself onto the floor several feet away. He did not reach for her. "Diesel," he said quietly, "or the alarm. Maybe both." Ardell's gaze shifted toward him. Fear had memory. It lived in vibration, scent, light, and sound long after the original danger disappeared. Eamon understood that better than he wanted to. The following evening, he sat at the kitchen table repairing an old brass lamp. The shade had been crushed on one side. The wiring had rotted inside the base. Most people would have thrown it away without a second thought. Morrow slept beneath the chair with one of Eamon's socks held between his paws. Ardell rose from the hearth and crossed the room. Her steps were stronger now, though still careful. She stopped beside Eamon's right leg. He continued working, letting her decide what the distance meant. After a long moment, Ardell lowered her head and placed it lightly across his injured knee. The weight was small, the permission inside it was not. Eamon's hand remained above the lamp. He did not touch her. He did not turn the moment into a demand for affection, gratitude, or proof that he had earned anything. Ardell stayed for only a few seconds before returning to Morrow. Eamon sat without moving. The lamp waited in pieces beneath his hands. For 30 years he had become skilled at recognizing what still had practical value: copper wire, straight hinges, sound gears, wood without rot. He had been less skilled at recognizing what remained alive beneath caution. Across the room, Ardell lay beside her puppy, watching him without fear for the first time. Eamon lowered his eyes to the damaged lamp and began fitting a new wire through its hollow stem. This time the house did not feel like a place he was repairing alone. The weather changed without kindness, but it changed. For nearly a week, clouds had pressed low over Sunfield Basin, turning the sky and fields into different shades of the same gray. Then one morning the wind shifted east, the clouds broke apart, and sunlight poured across the valley with such force that every fence wire and drift of snow seemed sharpened by light. Morningglass Farm looked less abandoned beneath that brightness. The repaired window panes in the greenhouse did not match, but they caught the sun in blue, amber, and pale green rectangles. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney. Fresh boards reinforced the porch. A line of Eamon's tools stood drying beneath the eaves after he had wiped the frost from them. Morrow had decided winter was no longer an enemy. The puppy charged across the yard with the reckless confidence of an animal whose legs had recovered faster than his judgment. His front paws broke through the crust while his lighter hindquarters continued forward, sending him nose first into a drift beside the fence. He emerged covered in snow and immediately attempted the same route again. Eamon leaned against a shovel and watched. A tactical mind would adjust. Morrow barked once, then attacked the drift. Ardell stood several yards away, her sable coat dark against the snow. She had regained enough strength to move with purpose, though her hips remained too narrow and her stamina faded quickly. She did not join the puppy's foolishness. Instead, she followed his movements with the solemn concern of a mother watching a child invent gravity. When Morrow ran too close to the broken greenhouse, Ardell stepped ahead of him and redirected him with one firm shoulder. She did this twice. On the third attempt, Morrow followed her without protest. Eamon noticed. Ardell had begun allowing the puppy farther from the house, but only if she chose the direction. That morning she led him behind the greenhouse. The ground there sloped toward what Eamon had assumed was an old drainage ditch. Snow had filled most of it, leaving only a shallow depression between weeds and collapsed fence posts. Ardell moved along the edge, nose low. Morrow copied her, though he mostly smelled clumps of dead grass and his own paws. At one point, Ardell stopped and scratched at the snow. Eamon expected a mouse trail. Instead, her paw broke through a thin sheet of ice. Beneath it, dark water moved slowly between stones. He set down the shovel. The channel should have been frozen solid. The temperature had remained below freezing for days, yet water still traveled beneath the crust in a narrow, persistent ribbon. Eamon crouched as far as his knee allowed and touched the ice beside the opening. The current was weak, but steady. "Where are you coming from?" he murmured. Ardell looked toward the southern pasture. Morrow tried to drink from the opening. Eamon caught him by the chest and moved him back. "Not until I know what it is." The puppy objected by chewing the cuff of his glove. By noon, Eamon had uncovered several feet of the channel. The stonework beneath the snow was too regular to be natural. Flat rocks lined both sides, and remnants of a rusted iron gate lay buried near the bank. Someone had once maintained the watercourse carefully. He found an old metal marker half hidden beneath brush. Most of the lettering had vanished, but one word remained: Morningglass. Eamon cleaned it with his thumb. The property had carried the name long before the real estate listing. The discovery did not feel like a secret. It felt more like finding the first surviving sentence in a book whose earlier pages had been torn away. He called the only person Odessa had said might understand the old water system. Gideon Rusk arrived the following afternoon in a narrow pickup held together by rust, wire, and professional resentment. He unfolded himself from the cab, tall and thin, wearing gray overalls beneath a brown-olive canvas jacket. A dark knit cap covered most of his thinning ash-gray hair. His beard was short and uneven, and the index finger of his right hand remained slightly bent from an old machinery injury. He carried a brass pressure gauge in one pocket and a yellow waterproof notebook in the other. "You uncovered it wrong," he said before greeting Eamon. Eamon looked at the exposed stones. "It is uncovered. You threw the snow uphill. Meltwater will run back into the cut. Then it will be water returning to water." Gideon stared at him. "That sentence means nothing. It means I am not moving the snow twice." They regarded each other for several seconds. Ardell watched from the porch. Morrow walked directly to Gideon, placed both front paws on his boot, and attempted to remove one lace. Gideon looked down. "This one yours?" "Temporarily." "He disagrees." Morrow tugged harder. Gideon freed the lace and followed Eamon behind the greenhouse. The irritation left his face when he saw the stonework. He knelt, removed one glove, and touched the water. Then he traced the old channel with his eyes toward the south. "This is the Morningglass lateral," as he said, "or what is left of it." The system had once carried shallow groundwater and seasonal runoff through several farms. Before deeper electric wells became common, families had used stone-lined channels, hand-dug collection pits, and small gravity-fed reservoirs. The old roots still mattered, Gideon explained, even where no water appeared on the surface. They followed natural fractures in the basin floor. He opened his notebook. Page after page contained dates, pressure readings, pump cycles, and rough maps drawn in pencil. Several wells south of the proposed Lydian site had lost pressure during the previous month. "Enough to notice," Gideon said. "Not enough to prove why. Did you report it?" Gideon shut the notebook. "No." "Why?" "Because the last time I told this town its irrigation plan was draining the eastern wells, they held a public meeting and decided I disliked progress." "Were you right?" "Mostly." "That is an inconvenient amount." Gideon's pale green eyes narrowed. "You have been here less than 2 weeks. The numbers do not care. No, people do." His answer carried more than annoyance. Years earlier, Gideon had recommended limiting summer pumping during a drought. Several farmers ignored him. When a replacement reservoir project failed, the town blamed the man who had warned them rather than the officials who had approved the design. He had kept measuring water since then. He had simply stopped expecting anyone to listen. "You should give these records to the county," Eamon said. Gideon tapped the notebook against his palm. Easy advice from a man no one here has called a liar yet. He returned the gauge to his pocket. Give them time. 2 evenings later, Sunfield Basin gathered inside the former Grange Hall to hear Lydian Renewal Systems present its proposal. The building smelled of wet wool, coffee, and old varnish. Folding chairs faced a portable screen. Residents stood along the walls because more people had attended than expected. Eamon took a seat near the back. Odessa Flint sat beside him in her brick-red flannel shirt and dark denim apron, having come directly from the Copper Spoon. She handed him a paper cup of coffee without asking. "I can buy my own." "You did not. That is not the same thing. It becomes the same thing once the coffee is in your hand." At the front, Fulton Vey stood beneath a projected image of the proposed facility. He wore the same composed expression he had brought to Morningglass Farm. His presentation was not dishonest in every respect. The project could create jobs. It could bring transportation contracts. It could help repair county roads. It could return tax revenue to an abandoned industrial zone. For a town watching its farms decline and its businesses close, those promises carried real weight. Warren Pell rose during the public comment period. He was a heavy-set man of 67 with a wind-reddened face, pale blue eyes, and a gray beard trimmed square along his jaw. His brown ranch coat showed grease at the cuffs. A faded cap from a defunct agricultural cooperative rested low on his forehead. "My hayfields do not pay what they did 10 years ago," he said. "My bank does not care about nostalgia. Lydian's offer gives some of us a way out before the land takes everything else with it." No one laughed. Odessa looked down at her coffee. Later, she admitted she was considering selling the rear parcel behind the cafe. The money would allow her to retire without carrying debt into her 70s. "You support the project?" Eamon asked. "I support being able to replace my furnace before it kills me." That is not an answer. It is the answer most people here actually have. When Eamon's turn came, he did not speak against the project. He asked how much groundwater the facility would require during operation and how drilling fluids, solvents, and damaged battery materials would be contained. Fulton answered smoothly. The proposed system would be closed-loop. Storage would follow state regulations. Groundwater use would be minimized. Independent monitoring would be included during later stages. Later stages? Eamon asked. Once final engineering is approved. What is being monitored now? A brief silence followed. Fulton explained that current work consisted only of geotechnical surveys and preliminary drilling. The answer was reasonable. It was also incomplete. Near the side aisle, a woman took notes in a blue notebook. Mara Quill was 44, slender, and quick-eyed, with dark hair cut at the jaw and a small scar crossing her right eyebrow. She wore a navy parka unzipped over a stone-gray sweater. When the meeting ended, she approached Eamon and introduced herself as editor of the Sunfield Ledger. "You asked the only question about current water monitoring," she said. "I asked a question. That is usually how articles begin. I am not part of your article. You spoke at a public meeting. That does not make my name useful. It may make your question useful." The next morning, Eamon found the newspaper folded inside the Copper Spoon. The article was measured. Mara did not accuse Lydian of wrongdoing. She described the economic promise of the project, Warren's position, and unanswered questions about present survey activities. She also described Eamon as a recently arrived property owner seeking information not yet available in the public record. The sentence angered him more than it should have. Recently arrived made him sound rootless. Property owner made Morningglass Farm sound like a transaction. Seeking information made him sound as though he had volunteered for a public role. He folded the paper too sharply and tore the edge. At home, he moved through the kitchen with unnecessary force. A cupboard door struck the wall. A wrench hit the table harder than intended. Ardell stopped eating. She crossed in front of Morrow and stood rigid, her head low. Eamon saw her expression and went still. No diesel engine had passed. No stranger stood at the door. The danger in the room was him, not because he would hurt them, but because tension had its own weather. Ardell had survived enough storms to recognize one before it broke. Eamon set the wrench down. That evening, after the house quieted, he sat on the floor several feet from Ardell. Morrow slept between her front legs. Eamon removed Coralie's drawing from his jacket and unfolded it across his knee. "I bought the place too late," he said. Ardell watched his hands. She wanted a house like this, not this exact one. A warmer one, probably. Better roof. His thumb followed the crooked chimney Coralie had drawn. For years I told myself I was saving. Then I told myself the timing was wrong. Then she was gone. And buying it felt foolish. Ardell's ears eased slightly. "I thought attachment was a form of bad planning." The sentence sounded ridiculous once spoken aloud. Morrow shifted in his sleep. Eamon folded the paper again. "Turns out distance does not prevent loss. It only makes sure there is less to lose." Ardell slowly lowered her head onto her paws. She did not understand Coralie, property, regret, or the arithmetic of 30 years. She understood that the man's voice had stopped carrying anger. The following morning, Ardell led Morrow back toward the channel. Sunlight shone through the ice. Near a bend below the greenhouse, she stopped abruptly. Gray foam had collected beneath the frozen surface. Ardell lowered her nose, then stepped back. Eamon approached carefully. There was a faint oily smell in the cold air. The ice over that section was darker than the rest, with a thin film trapped beneath it. He did not let Morrow near the water. Using a clean glass jar, he collected a small sample. He wrote the date, time, weather, and location on a strip of tape with his red carpenter's pencil. Then he took the sample to Gideon. They compared it with water from the farm's indoor tap and another surface point farther uphill. Gideon used a portable conductivity meter and simple field strips. The questionable sample showed higher conductivity and elevated metal readings. Neither man treated the result as proof. The jar had not been collected under a certified protocol. The geology of Sunfield Basin naturally contained minerals. Road runoff, old equipment, or disturbed soil could also affect surface water. "Could be nothing," Gideon said. "Could be several kinds of something. That is not scientific language. It is accurate." Gideon wrote the results in his yellow notebook. Outside his workshop, late sunlight stretched across the snow-covered valley. Eamon looked toward the low southern fields, where farm roofs rose from the white ground and invisible water moved beneath them all. Morningglass Farm was no longer only the house Coralie had once imagined. It sat on a living system older than any deed, fence, or company proposal. Eamon had purchased a boundary on paper. The water did not recognize it. For the first time since arriving, he understood that protecting the farm might require him to care about places beyond its property line. Lydian's response arrived 3 days after Gideon recorded the unusual readings. It came by email to Mara Quill, by printed letter to the county office, and by hand-delivered copy to Eamon's mailbox, as though repetition might give the words more authority. The company did not accuse him of lying. It used cleaner language. The sample had not been collected through a certified protocol. The container had not been issued by an accredited laboratory. There was no documented chain of custody. Surface runoff, mineral deposits, old farm equipment, or improper handling could have affected the results. Every statement was technically reasonable. That made it harder to dismiss. Fulton called later that afternoon and offered to fund a professional water survey. The company would cover the full cost, he said. Independent contractors, proper equipment, complete reporting. Chosen by Lydian, approved by Lydian and the county, paid by Lydian, yes. Eamon stood beside the kitchen window, watching Morrow pursue his own tail near the stove. That is not the same as independent. It is common practice. So is putting a thumb on a scale. Depends who owns the scale. Fulton exhaled quietly. You have concerns. I understand that. But suspicion is not evidence. No, Eamon said, and paid reassurance is not evidence either. He ended the call before the conversation could become polite enough to be useless. The difficulty was that Fulton was right about one thing. Eamon had no money for a certified laboratory. His pension covered food, fuel, taxes, and the small mortgage payment. The remaining savings had already begun shrinking under veterinary bills, furnace parts, insulation, and the dozen ordinary expenses that appeared whenever a neglected property was asked to become a home. The following morning, Eamon opened the rear of his pickup and began loading equipment he had intended to keep. A compact metal lathe went first. The machine was 20 years old, scarred along the base, and heavy enough that he used the barn pulley to lower it onto the truck bed. He had rebuilt its motor twice and replaced the belt with a part salvaged from a grain conveyor. Coralie had once watched him use it to shape a brass handle for their kitchen drawer. She had called the machine ugly. Then she had asked him never to sell it. Eamon rested one gloved hand on the cold housing. Morrow sat nearby with a strip of canvas between his teeth, watching him. Sentiment does not pay invoices, Eamon said. The puppy sneezed and dropped the canvas. By noon, the lathe was gone. So were 2 spare motors, a box of copper fittings, and a portable welder he had planned to use on the barn frame. The money paid Lenora's latest bill and bought more bottled water. That same week, Celeste Armitage began arriving at Morningglass Farm every other day. She drove an old white farm truck with a rusted sheep gate welded behind the cab. At 72, Celeste had the upright posture of someone who had spent most of her life resisting wind. Her long white hair was braided over one shoulder. She wore a forest green wool coat, brown work trousers, and black livestock boots polished by use rather than care. The first time she came, she brought 6 empty containers. "My well smells wrong," she said. Eamon looked at the containers. "Wrong how?" "Like pennies left in rainwater." "Have you told Gideon?" "No." "Lenora?" "No." "The county?" Celeste's dark green eyes hardened. "I came for water, not a committee." Her sheep farm lay south of Morningglass, along the same shallow groundwater route Gideon had mapped. Admitting the well had changed could reduce the property's value before she understood whether the problem was temporary. Eamon disliked the decision. He understood it anyway. He helped fill the containers from the bottled supplies stacked in the mudroom. Morrow followed Celeste from the first visit. The puppy circled her boots, sniffed the sheep scent on her coat, then sat directly on one of her feet as though claiming it. Celeste looked down. He always this presumptuous? He considers boundaries an unfinished theory. She bent and let Morrow smell the back of her fingers before touching the pale patch on his chest. Ardell stood 3 yards away. Her body remained still, but her attention never left Celeste's hand. Celeste did not reach toward her. That restraint mattered. By the 3rd visit, Morrow ran toward the sound of Celeste's truck. Ardell followed quickly, keeping herself between the puppy and the vehicle until the engine stopped. One bright afternoon, Eamon worked near the unfinished fence behind the greenhouse. He had removed a rotted lower board, but had not yet replaced it. The gap looked too narrow for Morrow. Morrow disagreed. He flattened himself, pushed through with his hind legs, and disappeared beneath the rail. Eamon heard the scrape too late. "Morrow!" The puppy ran downhill toward the old channel. Ardell shot after him. Eamon followed more slowly, his right knee resisting every step through the snow. By the time he reached the bend below the greenhouse, Morrow had found a shallow pool where the ice had softened around the stones. His muzzle was already in the water. Eamon pulled him back by the chest. Morrow coughed once, shook water from his whiskers, and tried to return. Ardell moved between him and the pool. Her growl was directed not at Eamon, but at the dark water. Eamon carried Morrow uphill. The puppy complained all the way to the house. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. Morrow ate part of his meal, dragged one of Eamon's gloves under the table, and fell asleep beside the stove. Shortly after dusk, he vomited. Eamon found him crouched near the back door, trembling. The puppy tried to stand and crossed his front legs awkwardly. His body tilted sideways. Morrow. His head lifted, but his eyes did not focus properly. Then his breathing changed. Each breath became shallow and rapid, as though his small ribs could not decide how much air they were allowed to hold. Eamon moved without panic because panic wasted time. He wrapped Morrow in a blanket, collected a jar of water from the pool, and called Lenora while carrying the puppy to the truck. Ardell tried to climb into the cab before he opened the rear door. "You are coming," he told her. Snow had begun falling by the time they reached the road. Not a storm, but a steady curtain that erased the edges of fields and turned the headlights into 2 pale tunnels. Morrow lay across the passenger seat. Ardell pressed close behind him, her muzzle resting near his hind legs. Eamon kept one hand on the wheel and the other lightly against the blanket whenever the road straightened. At Lenora's clinic, the lights were already on. She met them at the side entrance wearing a dark scrub top beneath her winter coat. Her hair had come loose from its tie, but her movements remained precise. Morrow vomited again while she carried him to the examination table. His temperature was unstable. His coordination had deteriorated. His gums were pale. Lenora placed an intravenous catheter and began fluids. She gave medication for nausea and drew blood into labeled tubes. Eamon stood too close. "Tell me what it is." "I do not know yet." "Then tell me what you think. Possible toxic exposure, possibly metabolic, possibly both." He drank from the channel. "That matters. It is not a diagnosis." Morrow's body trembled beneath the warming blanket. Ardell stood with her front paws against the lower edge of the table, watching every movement. Eamon looked at Lenora. "Tell me he will live." She did not answer immediately. "Lenora, I will not promise that." His voice sharpened. "You said he had recovered." "He had." "You said his lungs were stronger." "They were." "Then do something." "I am doing everything available here." "That is not enough." The room went quiet except for the fluid line and Morrow's uneven breathing. Lenora removed her gloves. Her eyes did not soften, but neither did they harden. Doing everything correctly does not give us the right to demand that life obey us. Eamon felt the sentence strike a place older than the clinic. A corridor. Fluorescent light. A surgeon explaining that Coralie's heart had stopped during a procedure meant to save it. Every correct step had been taken. Every qualified person had been present. Eamon had hated them for their calm voices because their calmness had sounded like surrender. Now he hated Lenora for refusing him the lie he had requested. "What good is all this training?" he said, quieter now, "if the moment something matters, all anyone can say is wait." Lenora looked at him across the table. "Training gives you better choices. It does not give you control over the ending." Morrow drew one strained breath, then another. Eamon placed both hands against the metal edge of the table. For 30 years he had told himself he feared attachment because attachment caused grief. That was not the whole truth. He feared the hour before grief, when love remained alive, but nothing he did could guarantee it would stay that way. He feared helplessness more than loss. Loss was an event. Helplessness was a room in which time continued moving while a person remained trapped inside it. Lenora preserved samples of Morrow's blood and vomit. Eamon's water jar was sealed inside an evidence bag, though she reminded him that its collection would not meet formal environmental standards. The veterinary laboratory in the state capital could identify broad chemical groups, but not immediately. For now, treatment meant fluids, warmth, monitoring, and support. Morrow survived the night. By morning, his tremors had lessened, though he still could not stand without assistance. The relief Eamon felt was not joy. It was permission to continue being afraid. Over the next 2 days, the incident widened beyond the puppy. Celeste reported that 4 sheep had stopped eating. Lenora received a call about 2 horses with reddened skin around their lower legs after standing near a flooded trough. A farm dog south of town vomited after drinking from an outdoor basin. None of the cases proved a shared cause. Animals became sick for many reasons during winter. But Gideon's records added another thread. Well pressure had dropped during the same nighttime hours when survey vehicles were active near Lydian's test site. Morrow improved slowly. He remained at the clinic with an intravenous line secured to one foreleg. Ardell stayed near him, refusing food unless Eamon sat in the room. On the 3rd evening, Eamon went home to collect supplies. He changed into his field jacket, took the truck keys from the hook, and opened the drawer where he kept a flashlight, binoculars, and an old road map. The service road near the survey site was public until the final gate. He could park at a distance, watch the vehicles, record times, follow patterns. He told himself this was not recklessness. That was how recklessness usually introduced itself. When he moved toward the door, Ardell stepped in front of him. She had returned from the clinic only long enough to eat and rest. Her body still carried tension from Morrow's illness. Eamon moved left. Ardell moved with him. Out of the way. She lowered her head. When he tried again, she caught the fabric of his trouser leg gently between her teeth and pulled backward. Not hard enough to tear. Hard enough to stop him. Eamon looked down at her. Ardell did not know about Lydian, service roads, survey logs, or chemical exposure. She knew the shape of departure. She knew the difference between a man leaving calmly and a man leaving with anger packed tightly inside him. Behind her, Morrow's empty blanket lay near the hearth. Eamon let the keys hang from his hand. He had spent years believing that going alone protected others from danger. In truth, it also protected him from disagreement. If no one shared the responsibility, no one could stop him. He returned the keys to the hook. Then he began making calls. That night, 6 adults gathered around Coralie's old kitchen table. Gideon brought his yellow notebook and wanted Mara to publish the pressure changes immediately. Mara refused. Patterns are not proof. They are data. They are partial data. Odessa sat with both hands around a coffee mug, worried that public accusations could destroy the project before anyone knew what had happened. People have already made plans around those land offers, she said. You cannot ask them to lose everything on a suspicion. Hollis reminded them that following vehicles was legal only from public roads, while trespassing, stealing records, or interfering with equipment could ruin any future case. Lenora wanted bottled water distributed to affected farms before anyone worried about headlines. The animals are the warning, she said. They should not become props in an argument. Eamon sat at the head of the table out of habit. For most of his life, that position had meant he was expected to decide. Tonight, every person in the room had information he did not possess. Mara knew public records. Gideon knew wells. Lenora knew illness. Hollis knew procedure. Odessa knew what the town feared losing. Ardell lay beside Morrow's empty blanket, waiting for the puppy to return from the clinic. Eamon looked at the people around Coralie's table. He did not tell them what to do. Instead, he asked Gideon first. What can you prove without guessing? Then Mara. What records can you obtain legally? Hollis. What would preserve evidence instead of contaminating it? Lenora. What should people stop using now? Odessa. Who will listen before they panic? The room changed, not because they agreed, because the work had finally become larger than one man's anger. Outside, snow pressed softly against the windows. Inside, 6 adults began dividing responsibility. For once, Eamon did not stand apart from the mission. He became part of it. The first thing Dr. Tamsin Rowe did was reject Eamon's water sample. She did it without apology. They stood in the mudroom at Morningglass Farm while snowmelt darkened the floorboards beneath their boots. Tamsin was 47, lean and steady, with tightly curled black hair gathered beneath a pale green knit cap. Her waterproof field jacket was the same muted green as winter sage, and a compact brass compass hung from one pocket beside a coil of sample labels. She held Eamon's glass jar toward the window. "This tells me where your concern began," she said. "It does not tell a regulator what was in the water." "The water did not change after I put it in the jar." "The legal value did." Eamon folded his arms. Tamsin continued before he could answer. "No certified container, no preserved blank, no verified chain of custody. No control against contamination from the lid, your hands, or the shelf where the jar sat. I washed it. I believe you." That sounds like the beginning of a disagreement. It is the beginning of science. Mara Quill stood near the kitchen table, hiding a smile behind her coffee cup. She had contacted Tamsin through the Cascadia Basin Trust, a nonprofit that monitored rural watersheds across eastern Oregon. The organization could not prosecute anyone, but it could fund independent sampling when preliminary conditions suggested a public risk. Tamsin had not come because Mara told an emotional story about a sick puppy. She had come because Gideon's pressure records formed a pattern. His yellow notebook lay open across the table. Tamsin placed tracing paper over the hand-drawn well map and marked every location where pressure had dropped. The points did not spread randomly. They followed a narrow diagonal from the Lydian survey zone toward Morningglass Farm, then continued south through Celeste's sheep pasture and several neighboring properties. Tamsin tapped the line with the end of her pen. "There is a mapped fracture beneath this section of the basin. Shallow groundwater can move through it faster than it moves through surrounding soil." Gideon leaned over her shoulder. "I told the county about that fracture 19 years ago." "You told them it might exist." "I was right. You were incompletely documented." Gideon straightened. Eamon looked between them. "This may be the first person I have met who irritates him faster than I do." Tamsin ignored both men. Her organization agreed to pay for one independent sampling round. It would not be enough to map every well, but it could compare water from 4 kinds of locations: an upstream point beyond the survey area, a collection site near the edge of Lydian's drilling zone, several wells south of the property, a control well outside the suspected groundwater route. The work began before sunrise the next morning. Tamsin read every sample code aloud before sealing each bottle. Gideon logged temperature and pressure. Eamon carried equipment but did not touch the sample containers once they were opened. When he reached toward one bottle to steady it on uneven ground, Tamsin stopped him with a look. "I have clean gloves." "You also touched your truck door." Eamon lowered his hand. "You enjoy this." "I enjoy samples that survive cross-examination." At Celeste's farm, frost silvered the sheep fencing. Several animals stood apart from the flock, their heads low over untouched hay. Celeste watched Tamsin collect water from the wellhead. "How long until we know?" she asked. "Preliminary results in several days. Confirmatory analysis may take longer. That means nobody knows. That means nobody honest knows yet." Celeste accepted the answer because she respected bluntness more than comfort. While the water moved through the laboratory system, the group worked on separate pieces of the same question. Lenora compiled records from every animal she had examined or discussed with neighboring veterinarians. She excluded cases that lacked dates, locations, or plausible water exposure. The final list was smaller than rumor suggested, but more coherent. Mara filed public record requests for geotechnical permits, drilling schedules, chemical inventories, maintenance logs, and incident summaries. Gideon compared well pressure changes against every available date. Eamon built a long board across the wall of the farmhouse kitchen. He drew a timeline with his red carpenter's pencil and pinned each verified fact in place. He refused to include guesses. The board remained mostly empty. That emptiness bothered everyone except Mara. "Empty space is useful," she said. "It shows what we do not know. It looks like failure. It looks like restraint." 3 days later, Celeste arrived with a memory card wrapped in wax paper. Her livestock camera stood near the eastern edge of her pasture, where she used it to monitor coyotes and injured sheep. It had captured nothing dramatic: no worker dumping barrels, no secret trench, no clear evidence of a crime. What it showed was a contractor's service truck entering the survey road at 11:43 p.m. The company's public operating log said work had ended at 6. The truck returned at 1:18 in the morning. Mara replayed the footage twice. "That does not prove a spill." "No, Tish," Hollis said. "It proves the log is incomplete." "That may matter more," Gideon replied. The vehicle's identification markings were too blurred to read, but the body shape and amber roof lights matched the fleet used by the drilling subcontractor. Mara added the timestamps to the wall. 2 days later, another piece arrived through fear rather than investigation. Merritt Shaw asked Eamon to meet him after closing. Shaw Agricultural Repair occupied a low metal building near the old rail spur. Through the open service bay, Eamon could see pump housings, tractor transmissions, and dismantled irrigation motors arranged beneath yellow work lights. Merritt stood beside a steel workbench, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. He was 56, thick through the shoulders, with close-cut brown-gray hair and a grease mark near his right temple. The tip of his left ring finger was missing above the first joint. He did not offer coffee. "A pump assembly came in the morning after that truck was on Celeste's camera," Merritt said. "From Lydian? From their drilling contractor. What failed?" Merritt reached beneath the bench and lifted a pressure valve wrapped in oily cloth. A fracture ran through the housing. "The alloy was wrong for the temperature," he said. "Cold made it brittle. Pressure finished the job. Was drilling fluid lost? They said the line depressurized. That is not what I asked." Merritt's jaw tightened. "They did not give me a volume." The contractor had requested an emergency replacement. Later, a supervisor told Merritt to destroy the failed valve and list the repair only as freeze damage. "Why did you keep it?" Eamon asked. "Because I keep useful metal." "That is not useful metal." "It was until you walked in." Merritt looked toward the darkened shop floor. The contractor accounted for a significant share of his winter revenue. If he surrendered the part, they might move every future repair to a larger company in Bend. 2 of Merritt's mechanics depended on those jobs. "You want me to gamble their paychecks on what you think happened?" No, Eamon said. "I want you to decide whether their paychecks should depend on pretending nothing happened. That is an easy sentence from a man who does not sign their checks." Eamon studied the cracked valve. He had spent most of his civilian life buying things after someone else had decided they were finished. A rusted gearbox, a burned motor, a bent gate hinge. Some discarded objects could be sold. Some could be rebuilt. This one had another purpose. "There are pieces you keep because they still have value," Eamon said. "And pieces you keep because someone hopes nobody can prove how they broke." Merritt stopped wiping his hands. Eamon did not threaten him. He did not reach for the valve. "If you give it to me, your lawyer will say I influenced you. Call Hollis. Let him document it. Tell the truth once. After that, the facts belong to whoever investigates them." Merritt stared at the fracture for a long time. Then he reached for the telephone. Hollis arrived within the hour. He photographed the valve where Merritt had stored it, recorded Merritt's statement, sealed the component, and signed the chain of custody form before taking it into official possession. The scene ended without Courage feeling noble. Merritt stood alone in the repair bay after the patrol vehicle left, looking as though he had just opened a door through which something expensive might soon enter. The laboratory results arrived the following week. Tamsin gathered everyone at Morningglass Farm. She placed the report on Coralie's old table. Samples taken near the survey zone and from the pool where Morrow had drunk contained compounds consistent with cold-weather drilling additives, an anti-freeze component, lubricant residues, and stabilizing agents used to prevent bore walls from collapsing. Concentrations in the southern wells were lower, still abnormal. The upstream and control samples did not show the same pattern. No one spoke for several seconds. Eamon looked toward Morrow, who was asleep near the stove with his recovering foreleg stretched awkwardly across a blanket. "Does this prove Lydian contaminated the water?" he asked. "No," Tamsin said. Gideon frowned. "It came from their direction, matches their permitted chemical list, follows the fracture, and appears after their equipment failed." "That is a strong association," Tamsin replied. "It is not proof of intent. We still need operational records, fluid loss volumes, and confirmation of the pathway." "Intent is not required for contamination," Mara said. "No, but language matters." The data suggested a release had probably occurred. It also suggested the release had not been reported promptly or accurately. That was enough for Mara to request a formal interview with Fulton. He met her at the Sunfield Ledger office, where Eamon sat silently along one wall. Fulton removed his charcoal overcoat and placed his leather briefcase beside the chair. His steel-gray hair remained carefully arranged, but fatigue showed beneath his eyes. Mara asked about the missing fluid. Fulton acknowledged receiving a summary describing a volume discrepancy. "Did the summary mention a failed pressure valve?" she asked. "No." "Did you request the full technical report?" "No." "Why not?" Marcel Danner, the technical manager, said the loss was contained inside the bore area and had not reached groundwater. "Did you verify that?" Fulton touched one of the gear-shaped cufflinks at his wrist. "No." The admission was quiet. Then he defended the project. Sunfield Basin was losing businesses. Farms were carrying debt. The abandoned cannery had stood empty for years. Lydian offered jobs that could not be replaced by good intentions or newspaper investigations. "If this proposal fails," Fulton said, looking at Eamon, "what exactly are you offering those people instead?" Eamon had no answer. Warren Pell asked him the same question outside the Copper Spoon the following morning. Snow had begun melting around the tires of Warren's truck. The farmer looked exhausted, his old cooperative cap pulled low. "You found dirty water," Warren said. "Fine, stop the drilling until it is safe." Eamon waited. "But do not pretend that solves my problem. The bank will not take clean water instead of a mortgage payment." His voice contained no threat, only arithmetic. Warren climbed into his truck and drove away. For the first time, Eamon saw the danger of winning only half the argument. If Lydian had hidden a release, the truth mattered. If the project collapsed and left desperate people with nothing, that mattered too. The investigation could expose a failure. It could not automatically build a future. At Morningglass Farm, another form of release was taking place more quietly. Celeste had agreed to watch Morrow while Lenora examined Ardell at the clinic. The first hour, Ardell paced between the examination room and the hallway door. Her nails clicked against the floor. Every distant sound made her lift her head. Lenora continued the examination without trying to soothe her falsely. "He is safe," Eamon said. Ardell paced again. From the adjoining room came the sound of Morrow knocking over a metal bowl, followed by Celeste's dry voice. "That was water, not an enemy." Morrow barked. Ardell stopped moving. She listened. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto the floor. Later that afternoon, Celeste led Morrow through the fenced yard behind Morningglass Farm. The puppy ran ahead, turned, and ran back, delighted by the existence of distance. Eamon stood beside Ardell. Every instinct in him expected the mother to call the puppy close. She did not. Her body remained alert, but she allowed the space to exist. Eamon felt an unexpected resistance inside himself. Morrow belonged near the stove, near Ardell, near his boots. The thought embarrassed him. He had rescued the puppy from a cold room, but survival did not create ownership over every future step. Celeste whistled once, and Morrow ran toward her. Ardell watched. Eamon watched Ardell. Neither moved to stop him. That evening, the group gathered again at Coralie's table. The wall timeline was no longer empty. It now held verified dates, sample results, photographs, maintenance records, veterinary cases, and unanswered questions. Mara began organizing evidence for the county zoning hearing. Tamsin prepared the hydrology map. Lenora refined the animal health report. Hollis listed which records could be referenced publicly and which belonged to the state investigation. Then Odessa placed a second sheet of paper beside the evidence files. At the top she had written, "What else can this town build?" There were no answers beneath it yet. Eamon looked from one page to the other. One plan would challenge the project. The other would have to challenge despair. For the first time, they understood that both were necessary. Snow began before dawn, light enough to leave the roads open and steady enough to soften every hard edge in Sunfield Basin. By 8 o'clock, the county building stood beneath a clean white roof. People gathered along the front steps, stamping snow from their boots and carrying paper cups that steamed in the cold. The town had not divided neatly. A group near the parking lot held signs demanding protection for the groundwater. Across from them, several workers wore jackets bearing Lydian's silver and green emblem. Between those groups stood farmers, cafe employees, mechanics, retirees, and families who carried no signs at all. Most had not come to choose between heroes and villains. They had come because their wells, debts, jobs, and homes had been placed inside the same argument. Eamon Brice arrived without a sign. His faded olive field jacket was buttoned over the charcoal sweater. The small U.S. veteran patch on his chest had nearly disappeared beneath the snow. Ardell walked beside him on a short leather lead, calm but alert. Morrow remained with Celeste at Morningglass Farm, away from the crowd and the noise. Eamon had considered leaving Ardell at home as well. Lenora had disagreed. "She does not need to enter the hearing room," she had said, "but you may need to walk afterward." He had not asked what she meant. He understood now. Mara Quill's investigation had gone online shortly after sunrise. Printed copies of the Sunfield Ledger were already changing hands outside the building. The headline was restrained. "Survey records, water tests, raise questions at Lydian's site." Mara had not described the company as criminal. She had not claimed anyone intended to contaminate the valley. Instead, she arranged verified facts in chronological order. The contractor's service vehicle had entered the survey road after official operations supposedly ended. A pressure valve had failed during extreme cold. The drilling system had recorded an unexplained loss of fluid. The full technical report had not been provided to Fulton. Chemical compounds consistent with permitted drilling additives had appeared near the survey area and along the southern groundwater route. Animal illnesses had been documented in the same corridor. Individually, each fact could be challenged. Together, they demanded an answer. Inside, folding chairs filled the county meeting chamber. A long table faced the public seating area. Behind it sat 5 members of the planning board, each with thick binders, microphones, and the strained expressions of people who knew every decision would disappoint someone. Deputy Hollis Crane stood near the side wall, not as security for either faction, but to maintain order and protect the evidence under county custody. The cracked valve remained sealed inside a clear evidence container on a clerk's table. Eamon chose a seat near the aisle. Odessa sat on one side of him, wearing her brick-red flannel shirt beneath a mustard cardigan. Gideon occupied the other side with his yellow notebook pressed against one knee. "You brought every page?" Eamon asked. Gideon looked offended. "I brought the useful pages. You have never believed a page was useless. That is why I brought all of them." The hearing opened with procedural language. The planning chair reminded everyone that the board was considering the proposed zoning change, not conducting a criminal trial. The board could delay or condition approval, but it could not determine civil damages or impose environmental penalties. The distinction disappointed those who wanted a dramatic verdict. It reassured Eamon. Important matters were often damaged when people demanded that one room solve every problem at once. Dr. Tamsin Rowe presented first. She placed a large hydrological map on the display board. Colored lines showed wells, collection points, elevation changes, and the natural fracture extending southeast from the survey zone. Tamsin spoke without theatrical emphasis. "The current data does not establish the complete extent of contamination," she said. "It does establish a plausible migration route and a chemical pattern inconsistent with the control locations." A board member asked whether the compounds could have come from farm machinery or road runoff. "Some components could," Tamsin answered. "The combined pattern, distribution, and timing make that explanation less likely. Additional investigation is required before any further drilling occurs." She did not promise certainty. She explained why uncertainty itself justified caution. Lenora followed with the veterinary records. She did not bring Morrow into the chamber. She used dates, symptoms, laboratory results, and geographic locations. Morrow Brice experienced acute neurological and gastrointestinal symptoms after drinking from a surface pool near the affected channel, she said. Other animals along the same corridor developed less severe symptoms. These cases do not all prove a shared cause, but they are consistent enough to require further review. Someone near the back whispered that Eamon had named the puppy after himself. Lenora paused. "The puppy's name is Morrow. Mr. Brice has not legally adopted a son." A small ripple of laughter passed through the room. The tension loosened for only a moment, but it mattered. Gideon presented the well pressure data next. He explained dates, pump cycles, and pressure reductions in plain language. Though his hand shook when he first opened the notebook, Eamon noticed. For years, Gideon had expected public rooms to become places of humiliation. Today, he stood before many of the same people who had once dismissed him. A board member challenged the age and calibration of his gauges. Gideon removed the brass instrument from his pocket. "I had this one tested last month. The older readings were cross-checked against service records from 3 separate farms." His voice steadied. "I am not asking you to believe me, because I have lived here a long time. I am asking you to examine the measurements." Eamon watched him return to his seat. Gideon did not look relieved. He looked taller. Celeste Armitage spoke after him. She stood with both hands resting on her applewood shepherd's staff. Her white braid lay over one shoulder, and her forest green coat had been brushed clean but not dressed up for the occasion. "My well began smelling metallic before Morrow became sick," she said. "I did not report it." Murmurs spread through the room. Celeste waited. "I was afraid the value of my land would fall. I was afraid the company would withdraw its offer. I was afraid my neighbors would think my farm was damaged." A man behind Warren Pell called out, So you let everyone keep using the water? Celeste turned toward the voice. I made a cowardly decision. The room quieted. She did not defend herself with confusion, age, or financial pressure. I am telling you now because hiding a problem did not protect my farm. It only delayed the moment when others could respond. Her admission changed the hearing. A woman from the southern road raised her hand and reported a chemical odor in an outdoor trough. Another farmer mentioned discoloration around a well cap. A third said he had assumed his livestock's reduced appetite came from winter feed. None of the statements constituted proof. Together, they revealed how fear and embarrassment had kept information isolated. Warren Pell was called next. He removed his old cooperative cap before approaching the microphone. I believe there was a leak, he said. I believe it should have been reported. I believe the drilling should stop until the water is tested properly. Several people holding water protection signs nodded. Warren continued, I also believe most of the people cheering that decision are not the ones facing foreclosure. The nodding stopped. He explained that his bank had extended his loan twice. Hay prices had fallen. Equipment repairs consumed what little margin remained. Lydian's land offer was not a luxury. It was an exit. If this project is suspended, my debt does not pause with it, Warren said. Protect the water. But do not pretend that protecting it pays the people who were counting on this project. No one interrupted him. He returned to his seat without looking toward Eamon. Fulton Vey approached the table on behalf of Lydian. His charcoal coat had been removed, revealing a navy sweater over a white shirt. The gear-shaped cufflinks at his wrists caught the overhead light. Fulton's opening statement was careful. Lydian accepted the need for further testing. The company would cooperate with state agencies. The broader battery recovery project, however, should not be declared unsafe solely because of a contractor's equipment failure during preliminary work. A board member asked when Fulton first learned of the lost drilling fluid. I received a summary the following morning. Did you receive the full incident report? No. Did you request it? Fulton looked down at his hands. His thumb touched one cufflink. No. Why? Marcel Danner, the project's technical manager, told me the loss had been contained within the bore area and presented no groundwater risk. Did Mr. Danner recommend stopping work? He recommended monitoring pressure and continuing operations. To preserve the schedule, Fulton remained silent for a fraction too long. Yes. A representative seated behind him shifted uncomfortably. Fulton could have retreated into corporate language. He could have said the issue belonged to engineers or attorneys. Instead, he looked toward the board. I defended the project using information I had not personally verified. I believed the technical team had resolved the incident. I also wanted to believe that because delay would have endangered the project. It was not a confession of conspiracy. It was an admission of convenience. He still argued that a redesigned facility could operate safely and that rejecting all industrial development would leave Sunfield Basin without a credible economic plan. When he returned to his seat, neither side applauded. That absence of applause made the moment more honest. Eamon was called last. He carried no prepared speech. Hollis transferred the sealed valve to the evidence table before Eamon approached. The fracture through the metal housing was visible beneath the clear cover. Eamon rested both hands on the edge of the podium. For a moment, the room waited for him to sound like the soldier many of them had imagined from Mara's earlier description. He did not. I spent most of the last 30 years repairing machinery other people had thrown away, he began. His voice was low. The microphones carried it without effort. Some things need new wiring. Some need a welded frame. Some only need rust removed and time. He looked at the valve. But if a man finds a fracture, paints over it, and sells the machine as safe, he has not repaired anything. He has moved the danger to the next person. Eamon did not ask the board to permanently ban Lydian. He requested specific actions. Suspend the current survey work. Require independent groundwater assessment. Protect the fracture corridor as a sensitive water route. Require external monitoring for any revised proposal. Prevent the company or contractor involved in the release from controlling the safety review. Demand a genuinely closed handling system if the project returned. Then he unfolded a second sheet of paper. It was not evidence. It was a preliminary proposal. Several residents had begun exploring a cooperative that would repair and reuse agricultural equipment inside the abandoned cannery. Merritt could supervise mechanical work. Gideon could manage pump systems. Eamon could teach salvage recovery and metal sorting. Odessa had begun calculating food service needs for workers. The idea was incomplete. Eamon said so. It will not replace every job Lydian promised. It may not survive its first year. The room shifted. People were not accustomed to proposals admitting weakness. But a town should not have to choose between having no work and accepting risks it is not allowed to examine. He turned toward Warren. This does not pay anyone's mortgage today. Warren's expression did not change. It is only an attempt to build another answer. The board recessed for nearly 2 hours. People moved into the hallway where arguments restarted in quieter voices. Odessa distributed sandwiches from 2 large paper bags. No one asked who had paid for them. Mara stood beside a window, answering questions, but refusing to speculate about the decision. Ardell waited outside beneath the covered entrance with a volunteer from Lenora's clinic. When Eamon went to check on her, she placed one paw on his boot. He crouched carefully and rubbed the worn edge of his watch. I said what I could. Ardell looked toward the doors. I know, waiting is not your preferred part either. When the hearing resumed, the board issued a limited order. The zoning decision would be postponed. All survey drilling would be suspended. An expanded environmental review would be required. The incident file would be referred to the State Environmental Agency. Affected households would receive temporary bottled water and tank deliveries. There was no declaration of victory, no final rejection of the project, no promise that damaged wells would recover quickly. Some residents approached Eamon afterward and thanked him. Others accused him of delaying jobs, contracts, and land sales. Warren passed close by without offering his hand. Eamon did not stop him. Outside, evening had turned the falling snow blue. He walked the final distance to the truck with Ardell beside him. The crowd sounds faded behind the building. At the edge of the parking lot, Eamon stopped. I do not know whether we helped this town, he told her. Maybe we only traded one difficult future for another. Ardell leaned her shoulder against his leg. The pressure was steady, not demanding. She could not tell him the board had chosen correctly. She could not promise the cooperative would work or the wells would clear. She remained beside him while the answer was still unfinished. Eamon looked across the white road leading home. He had once believed loyalty meant bringing everyone safely to the end of a mission. Now he understood it differently. Loyalty was not certainty. It was the decision to stay when certainty was unavailable. A year later, winter returned to Sunfield Basin without asking whether anyone was ready. Snow settled over the valley in clean white layers. It covered the survey road, the abandoned cannery roof, Warren Pell's tired hayfields, and the repaired porch at Morningglass Farm. From a distance, the town looked restored. Up close, nothing was that simple. The state investigation had ended in late autumn. Its report concluded that Lydian Renewal Systems and its drilling contractor had failed to report the loss of survey fluid within the required time. Investigators found incomplete operating logs, delayed internal warnings, and equipment that should not have been used under the recorded temperatures. Lydian was fined. The company was ordered to remove contaminated material from the drilling area, seal the affected bore properly, and fund groundwater monitoring for several years. The original battery processing proposal was withdrawn. It was not permanently forbidden. Lydian could submit a redesigned project in the future, but any new plan would face stricter engineering requirements, independent monitoring, and greater protection around the groundwater fracture. Some residents called that justice. Others called it the death of the only serious investment Sunfield Basin had seen in years. Both groups could point to facts. Fulton Vey left Lydian after the investigation. He did not visit Morningglass Farm to apologize, and Eamon did not receive a letter asking for forgiveness. Mara later learned that Fulton had begun advising smaller development projects in neighboring counties, mostly on public disclosure and community consultation. Whether he had become a better man, Eamon could not say. Perhaps he had simply become a more careful one. Marcel Danner lost his management position and faced administrative penalties connected to the delayed reporting and incomplete technical record. There was no arrest, no courtroom spectacle, and no dramatic image of a man being led away in handcuffs. The failure had been less theatrical than that, a decision made to protect a schedule, a warning softened before being passed upward, a damaged valve described too vaguely. A few adults choosing the easier version of the truth until the consequences moved beyond their control. The wells south of the survey area had not returned entirely to normal. Some households used filters supplied through the cleanup agreement. Tamsin's organization continued collecting samples every month. Celeste's well no longer carried the sharp metallic smell, but she still used bottled water for young animals. The valley was recovering. Recovery, Eamon had learned, was not the same as being restored. The same was true of the old cannery. The repair cooperative occupied only the western section of the building. The eastern wing remained dark, its windows boarded, and its concrete floor split by frost. A hand-painted sign above the usable entrance read, Sunfield Repair and Reuse Cooperative. The lettering leaned slightly because Odessa had refused to let Eamon measure it a fourth time. The cooperative employed 4 people part-time and 2 on seasonal contracts. It carried a small loan. The roof over the storage room still leaked during heavy thaw. Several farmers preferred buying new equipment rather than trusting machinery repaired by people working inside an abandoned cannery. There had been no miracle. There had only been work. Eamon spent 3 mornings each week there. He sorted metals, evaluated broken machinery, designed repair plans, and taught younger workers how to determine whether a component was worth restoring. He no longer lifted heavy housings himself. When a transmission needed moving, he used the overhead hoist or called for help. The first few times, asking still felt like swallowing something sharp. It became easier when no one treated the request as weakness. Gideon managed the pump and irrigation work. He had installed a long testing bench along one wall and labeled every pressure gauge in handwriting so precise it looked engraved. Merritt supervised welding and mechanical repairs. The drilling contractor had stopped using his shop, as he had feared. The cooperative's work had not fully replaced that income, but it had kept both of his mechanics employed. Odessa organized meals for volunteers and insisted that accounting meetings should never occur without soup. Mara continued reporting on the state monitoring program, the cleanup deadlines, and every promise made by the county. No one was allowed to declare the problem solved simply because the headlines had become less interesting. Warren Pell remained in debt. The cooperative rented one side of his barn for overflow storage and purchased obsolete machinery from his property for parts. The money delayed foreclosure proceedings but did not erase the loan. He and Eamon were not friends. At the Copper Spoon, Warren no longer turned his chair away when Eamon entered. Occasionally, they discussed equipment prices or weather. Neither mentioned the hearing unless necessary. That was as close to reconciliation as either man was prepared to offer. Morningglass Farm had changed more quietly. The barn no longer leaned. One section had been rebuilt as a temporary rehabilitation space for adult dogs abandoned by their owners or left without care after an owner's death. It was not an independent rescue shelter. Lenora's clinic, the county animal control office, and a licensed regional rescue organization handled the medical, legal, and adoption work. Morningglass provided only what Eamon could realistically sustain: a small quarantine stall, a food storage room, a quiet sleeping area, a fenced yard. No more than 2 foster dogs at a time, in addition to Ardell. Hollis handled transfer records. Lenora approved each placement. Odessa coordinated adult volunteers who cleaned, delivered supplies, or transported animals. Eamon provided routine. He fed at the same times each day. He kept voices low. He never cornered a frightened animal. He repaired beds, gates, bowls, and damaged truss where he could. He did not call himself a trainer. Some things improved because a person knew what to do. Others improved because nothing bad happened for enough consecutive days. Ardell moved through the farm as though she had always belonged there. Her coat had regained its deep sable shine. The thinness at her hips was gone. The crescent tear in her left ear remained, as did the dark tip of her tail. A small copper tag shaped like a drop of water hung beside her old collar. She no longer slept between Eamon and every door. At night, she often chose the rug near the stove, where she could hear the house. Without guarding every room, diesel engines still tightened her body. When one passed too close, Eamon spoke her name in the same calm voice he had used during their first week together. She would look toward him, breathe, and return to the present. Morrow lived with Celeste. The change had taken months. First, Celeste watched him for several hours, then for an afternoon. Later, he stayed for one night. Ardell paced during that first evening, but she did not panic. Eamon drank too much coffee and pretended he was awake because of his knee. By spring, Morrow spent most of his time at Celeste's sheep farm. The formal adoption followed only when it had already become clear where his daily life belonged. Now almost 14 months old, Morrow had grown into a tall, energetic dog with a broad chest, a pale patch still visible beneath his throat, and one ear that tilted slightly when he relaxed. He was not a perfect herding dog. He sometimes followed the wrong sheep, became distracted by ravens, and once carried Celeste's glove halfway across a muddy field instead of responding to her whistle. He was useful enough. More importantly, he was happy. Whenever Celeste brought him to Morningglass Farm, Morrow launched himself from the truck and raced toward the porch. Ardell greeted him with bright eyes, circling once before touching her muzzle to his neck. When he left again, she watched the truck reach the road. Then she returned to the house. Eamon did the same. The first time Morrow left without him, the silence had felt like something missing. Now it felt like evidence that a life had expanded beyond the room where it was saved. On Thursday evenings, Odessa pushed 3 tables together inside the Copper Spoon. There was no official invitation list. Farmers, mechanics, clinic workers, volunteers, and anyone tired of eating alone could sit there. Eamon first attended because the kitchen stove needed a new regulator. He repaired it and stayed for coffee. The next week, Odessa set a cup at the far end of the table before he arrived. Eventually, that chair became his. He did not speak much. No one required him to. There were still days when Coralie's absence pressed closer than usual. Certain songs, a particular kind of winter light, or the smell of warm brass could return him to a life that had ended before anyone at the table knew him. On those evenings, he no longer disappeared. He told Odessa, "I am not good company tonight." She would answer, then be poor company quietly. The chair remained available. Near the end of December, Eamon opened the metal box he had carried through 5 homes and 3 decades. Coralie's drawing lay inside. The folds had weakened. One corner had begun to separate. Eamon placed it between 2 clean sheets of glass. He built a frame from straight-grained wood salvaged from the barn wall. The wood retained nail marks and a narrow dark stain along one edge. He could have sanded the marks away. He chose not to. When the frame was finished, he hung it in the living room above the repaired brass lamp. Below it, he mounted a small wooden plaque. He had written the words twice before carving them. A home is not complete when its door is closed. It is complete when someone knows they will be welcomed if they step through it. Ardell lay nearby while he worked. When Eamon stepped back to judge whether the frame was level, he found himself imagining what Coralie might have said. She would have pointed out that the right side was 1/8 of an inch too high. Then she would have asked him not to fix it. The thought made him smile without pain disappearing from it. That was new. One brilliant morning after fresh snow, a blue sedan climbed the access road. An elderly woman stepped out with a senior German shepherd beside her. The dog moved slowly, gray showing around the muzzle. One rear leg was stiff, but the animal was neither starving nor near death. The woman's older brother had recently died. The dog had belonged to him, and her apartment did not allow large animals. Lenora had already completed the health examination. The rescue organization had approved a temporary placement. Odessa stood inside the barn with a clipboard. A volunteer carried clean blankets into the quiet room. Hollis reviewed the transfer form on the hood of his patrol vehicle. There was no crisis, no frozen bucket, no race against failing breath. Only a living creature whose old life had ended and whose next one had not yet begun. Eamon stood at the barn entrance with Ardell. The senior dog stopped several feet away. Ardell watched him. A year earlier, she might have blocked the doorway, positioning herself between the stranger and everything she considered hers. Now, she looked toward Eamon, then back at the older dog. Eamon lowered himself slightly, careful of his knee. He allowed the dog to approach at his own pace. "We still have one place near the fire," he said. The shepherd sniffed the cold air. Ardell stepped aside. The dog entered. Behind Eamon stood the small network that had grown around Morningglass Farm. Paperwork, medicine, volunteers, food, transport, knowledge, and people willing to answer when called. The first time Eamon opened the farmhouse door, he had believed he was alone. Now he understood that a door could open in both directions. It could admit someone in need. It could also allow responsibility, friendship, and grief to move outward instead of remaining trapped inside one person. Beyond the barn, pieces of metal waited beneath a dusting of snow. Sunlight flashed across their exposed edges like fragments of mirror. For most of his life, Eamon had measured value by whether an object could be repaired and returned to its former use. He no longer believed healing worked that way. People were not machines. Animals were not broken equipment. Nothing truly alive returned unchanged from loss. Healing meant building a different life from what remained. Life had not returned Coralie. It had not restored the 30 years Eamon spent behind carefully managed distance. It had given him Morningglass Farm, Ardell, an imperfect town, and work that mattered enough to rise for each morning. The future still offered no guarantees. Eamon no longer required them. He opened the inner door toward the warm room. Ardell walked through beside the senior dog. Eamon followed. This time, he did not enter alone. Sometimes healing does not mean getting back the life we once had. It means allowing grace to help us build a new one from what remains. Eamon could not recover the years he lost or bring Coralie home, but by opening one door, then another, he discovered that love can return in unfamiliar forms, and that God often sends hope quietly through a faithful animal, a shared table, or someone willing to stay. May you find the courage to keep one door open in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances. May peace find its way to your home.